Welcome to the official YouTube channel for me, the Colin Cowherd Podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button right there so you don't miss any of our football content this postseason. Going to have instant reactions after every big game. Thanks. Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's pivot to this. The Chicago Bears hired Ben Johnson. The story had leaked. There was a lot of rumors that Ben Johnson, the coordinator for the Lions, offensive coordinator, was going to go to the Raiders. That was probably Ben Johnson's people leaking it. So it looked like he was going to the Raiders because they couldn't quite get everything they wanted. He won't be able to choose, I imagine, his own general manager. When the story came out, I said this today on TV, when the story came out of the Raiders and Ben Johnson, I'm like, bro, that's the worst opening. I don't like it at all. I will say this. About a week ago, Caleb Williams said, I didn't think it was subtle. I'd like an offensive coach. Remember, he said, I'd like a leader of men. Vague, doesn't mean anything. And then I'd like an offensive coach I could grow with. That would be nice. And I think that was kind of like, guys, I'm not going to demand anything. I'm not going to be publicly difficult. Get me an offensive coach. And that tells you, and this was what Brady said about Belichick in the documentary. And I've heard enough of Brady behind the scenes on Belichick saying, listen, Bill just didn't even know our terminology. It's not a criticism of Bill. They live in a different world. I mean, look at Bill's offensive drafting. Look at Tomlin's offensive lines and run game. They just don't know. We talked about this yesterday. DeMeco Ryans not calling a timeout for Houston. Like defensive coaches, it's a different language. And I think Ben Johnson will get the best out of Caleb Williams. That may not be Jaden Daniels. He may never throw like Michael Penix, but I think he'll get the best out of Caleb. And at this point, if you can get him right, and all of a sudden in 3-4 years, you're working on a second contract, by Chicago Bear quarterback standards, John, that's a win.
Today is a day to celebrate if you're a Bears fan. You got the guy that every one of these teams with an opening would have hired. Maybe not counting the Cowboys, not quite sure what's going on down there. But all the other teams, the Raiders wanted him. He wouldn't interview with the Jets. They'd hire him yesterday. Obviously, the Jags wanted him. This is I was thinking about it today. You know, Sean McVay, when he got hired, and Kevin O'Connell weren't as famous, definitely Sean, as they've become. And same with Kevin O'Connell. I would say it's kind of Josh McDaniels, Kyle Shanahan. You know, when Mark Davis hired Josh McDaniels, that was a pretty big deal. Definitely when Ballard tried. And when the Niners hired Kyle Shanahan, this young guy dominating on offense felt like this guy's a star, and a lot of people were interested in him. That's what they got today. And they essentially, Tom Brady wanted someone, and he chose the Bears. Now, I told you last night, even if Tom Brady wants you and is a great salesman and you like Tom Brady, and I don't blame you, I'd want to work with Tom Brady too if I was Ben Johnson. He doesn't live in Vegas. And, you know, the partner that bought in from the VC firm, he's in New York. You're still going into the building every day, even if you get to hire your own GM, and Mark Davis is there every day. Like, that's a fact. So unless Tom was going to sell his compound in Florida, in South Florida, and come to Vegas, like, it's great, Tom. You can text him all the time. It's not the same as, you know, when John Elway ran the Broncos, he was there. So I always thought that was a little weird. Now, I understood Ben Johnson Ben Johnson's 38 years old. Tom Brady talking to Tom Brady, it's like talking to football Jesus. So I would imagine he took him seriously. But, you know, when you coach in a division, think how well he knows the personnel on this team. And think how comfortable he is, too. You know, he's been hesitant to take one of these jobs. Look at last year. I mean, that Washington job was a pretty damn good opportunity, and a lot of people thought about it. Obviously, they exceeded expectations, but it's like you got a young GM that knows what he's doing. You got the second overall pick. You got a new owner. And he's like, no. And I think he was unsure. Well, now he takes the Bears job, which I think we all agree is a little weird still with Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles. But he knows the Lions like the back of his hand, regardless whoever they hire as a defensive coordinator when Glenn leaves. The Vikings and the Packers, he's been playing against for years. So he knows the players, he knows the coaches, and obviously he knows this team well. So I think there's a comfort level of just staying in the division for a young guy that's been hesitant. You know, some guys are just, I want the job. And Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, they were just Josh McDaniels way back in the day. This guy really took his time, which is, I would say, rare in a profession that's full of like alpha ambition, that there's just no holding it back, which I respect. But this is, There's going to be a lot of this is a unique for there would have been no pressure with the Raiders, right? The first year or so.
Right,
There's
right.
pressure here. You can't win
I like
5 or 6 games and everyone's you don't have to win 12, but you got to be in the wild card mix next year with this roster, don't you?
Yeah, I think so. Let me push back on this. Here's what worries me about Ben Johnson. Number one, it's a big lift. It's a dysfunctional organization. Culture changers never whiff. They may not win Super Bowls, but the Pete Carrolls, the Mike Vrabels, the Jim Harbaughs, like Dan Campbell, they come in, they change the culture. You can eventually find good coordinators.
Yeah.
Coordinators, however, often miss badly. And there is a little, think about coordinators who were highly recommended. Brady recommended Josh McDaniels. Peyton Manning heavily promoted Adam Gase, and they didn't work. Both were a little quirky. I mean, Josh McDaniels was offered the Colts job, accepted, and then did a U-turn and left it. Very quirky. Ben Johnson, mid-flight, I don't want the job. Adam Gase, Peyton Manning adored him, loved him, promoted him. Disaster, weird, press conference, odd guy. Ben Johnson is a little quirky. He's got a little Adam Gase and a little Josh McDaniel. I know Josh. I like Josh. But when McVay got the job and you watched his first press conference, like guys thought he was cool, women thought he was hot. Like it was like, whoa, what are we watching? Like
This guy ain't McVay as a personality, not even
no,
close.
no. And that's my thing. There's a little quirky to him, a little odd to him. His personality, he's a little reticent. He's a little withdrawn. So I'm not saying he can't work, but I'm saying if you told me he was going to be McVay or closer to Adam Gase or Josh McDaniel, based on what I've seen of his personality, it's the latter two.
Yeah, to me, he's not McVay personality. Kyle can be a little weird.
Yeah, he can.
The difference, though, with Kyle is when the 49ers hired him in 17, he had been a coordinator for going on close to 10 years at multiple spots. He'd been in Cleveland, he'd been in Atlanta, he'd been with his dad, he'd been at Houston. So he had seen it all for a guy that was 37, 38 years old.
And his dad was a legendary coach.
Yeah. He'd been around football his whole life, but even just his own experience as a coordinator, 4 different teams, seen it all, and got to go to a place that was a disaster, no expectations, with John Lynch, who hadn't been a GM, but anyone who's ever met John Lynch, he ain't going to fail at anything. He's like a Steve Kerr. Like, put him in a position, it will succeed, and they got to ease into it. This is not that situation. I actually think I've been watching his press conference this year. I think he's kind of gained more confidence in himself. I think if you watch him in his first couple of years, he was kind of whispered. He was just not confident. I think he's definitely gained some confidence. But think about the two people running this organization now. A first-time head coach who just, for a couple of years, was almost scared of taking that role, and a GM who's under 40 and has felt at times to be a little over his head. Former offensive lineman, but he drafts like he's a wide receiver. It's a little bizarre in an organization that's not pretty dysfunctional. Say what you want about Dan Campbell. We're going to learn a lot about him moving forward without the coordinators. Dan Campbell ain't scared of shit. Parcells, Peyton, they want that guy right next to him. So he's tailor-made. Like Dan Campbell would walk right into the Bears and they would be better. This is, everyone's going to be looking at you, starting with the quarterback who's got some issues right now. And that's the elephant in the room, too, because there's like the pressure of saving Caleb, right? And the added, gasoline on this fire is the Jaden Daniels phenomenon, right? So it's like that plays a part in it. It's like, well, the guy that we passed on is at Washington becoming one of the greatest players we've ever seen. And if Drake May starts looking credible, these are the things that it's a very hard. Now, I just read before we hopped on, he got $13 million a year. So financially, he's in a different stratosphere. He was already a multimillionaire, but now he gets a 5-year, $13 million contract. Dennis Allen, that's a good first hire. A mature, good defensive coordinator, has been a head coach, perfectly suited to be a number 2. Like, that's a high-level hire.
Yes.
But, and their defense is going to be good. But I say this all the time, like, as an offensive coordinator, when someone gets a DUI on defense, Ben Johnson never had to deal with that in Detroit. Dan did. When the special teamer gets in a fight on the sideline, that's not Ben's problem. Hell, when Jamison Williams gets in trouble, Dan and the GM deal with that. You just figure out who's next on the roster. Right. All that stuff is now on your desk when you're used to just drawing the plays. There's a lot on your plate being a head coach with stuff that has nothing to do with the game.
Well, and that's why one of the advantages McVay had, not only is he a sharp guy, but Goff was low maintenance. Like
Yeah.
Goff was just, I mean, like one of the things that was really tough for Matt LaFleur, first job, Aaron's not low maintenance. It
No.
makes it harder. So, it's when you start looking at this, a guy like a Vrabel, older coaches, Harbaugh, they can deal sort of with the veteran quarterback with an ego. But if you start looking around, I was thinking about this. Drake May, quiet kid. Jaden Daniels, quiet kid. Justin Herbert, quiet kid. You start looking around at these guys. Josh Allen, total team guy. I think Lamar.
I'd even put the Bo Nix and Penix pretty low key guys.
Yeah, I mean Lamar Jackson is like, and you know something. Mahomes' family, maybe a little quirky. Mahomes is like a dude. You could go have beers with Mahomes tonight. One of the things you start looking at, one of the criticisms of Caleb was he's emotional, like he's got his stuff. I don't know if that is true. I like him. But you start looking at it, you have poor owners, disconnected. Kevin Warren's political. Ryan Poles young. Caleb is not Jaden Daniels, the personality. He was the first NIL star in our lives, the first $5 million a year NIL star. And Chicago's got a very loud, fairly relentless media, which all the teams in Chicago stink, so they're just angry and tough. I think the Chicago job is hard. I think they should be happy they have Ben Johnson. But I said he would have been my second choice. McCarthy has dealt with Jerry, Aaron Rodgers, a meddling owner, no owner, big brands. McCarthy was my choice, but I know he's not sexy. And I know Ben is, but McCarthy would not have failed. I could see Ben Johnson after about 2 years going, the hell did I get myself into?
Yeah, to me, I understand if you're in the Bears, you have to take this swing because
Yeah.
you're just hoping that this is some version of LaFleur, O'Connell, McVay, Kyle. If he's closer to Mike McDaniel, you're in trouble given your division. Like you got to hope he's one of those four.
There was another quirky guy was Mike McDaniels. The media loved him. He was quirky. Quirky doesn't necessarily work in this league.
I would say the one, at least the way he coaches, he is a physical, like a run game oriented guy. The question is that Dan forcing him to do that because of the personnel that he supplies them with? Because a lot of times, like, I don't think Dan's calling double passes to Jamison Williams down 10. I don't know if he's inclined to do that. I have no problem with taking the swing. I always say this about a draft pick high, like take the guy with the traits, because if it does
Yeah.
work out, you get Josh Allen rather than thinking you can get a high floor guy like Mac Jones and Kenny Pickett. They are just as likely to bust, so you might as well swing for the fences. But like if you tell me Pete Carroll gets the Raider job and Mike McCarthy gets the Jets job, like we have a pretty good idea those guys just know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And like you do have Caleb Williams, so you could have made the argument of just hire Mike McCarthy. He can get the train on the tracks, and maybe within a year,
That was my
you'll be
argument.
9 wins.
That was my argument. Mike would get the train on the tracks guaranteed.
This could be, an Eberflus version all over again. It 100% could.
I
Because
don't I don't think it will, but I will say this. I do think there's a Gase, Josh McDaniel, there's a feel that he's a little different personality wise. He's not
I,
corporate. He's kind of his own dude.
I think the thing that makes me nervous is the alignment in the organization.
Yeah.
He's like Poles is Poles fighting for his job. You got Kevin Warren doing who knows what. The stadium situations, a big elephant in the room with the organization. Like they haven't really made progress. They pulled out of the suburbs. You know that area better than me. I just read these
Yep.
articles, but that's kind of up in the air. You got Kevin Warren who really likes to be involved in football, but when it goes bad, like he's not sitting there at the dais next to the coach. You just got a lot. You got an owner who did you see the reports today that he was very uncomfortable cutting these checks? It's like, guys, the going rate for these coaches is now 10 to 13 million dollars. You get 450 million dollars from the league based on the media rights deal. This is not a fickle business. You're in these guaranteed contracts of billions of dollars. If you are worried over the difference of, well, I'm used to paying guys $7 or $8 million to now we have to pay a guy 12 or 13, that's hard to operate that way as an organization. It really is. And this team, the McCaskies, Their kids are running it, feel a little like they got no clue what they're doing. And the problem is they entrust, before it was Ted Phillips, now it's Kevin Warren, these people that play such a huge role because these guys aren't that comfortable in business besides just saying no. Like the one thing you get with Robert Kraft or you get with Jeffrey Lurie, they're very comfortable in a negotiation over billions of dollars or
Yeah.
hundreds of millions of
I mean,
dollars.
Kraft negotiates the TV deal for the NFL. He's the go-to owner.
So some of these owners, and this is what I've always respected about Mark Davis. He doesn't have anywhere near the money the Bears have. He was cutting $100 million. He was taking big swings on coaches because he knew if I get this right, we'll win. He just always gets it wrong. And this is like, it feels like this is what the media pressured them to do. So they did it. And you can't, no one's really going to say anything negative. Like we can nitpick them, but everyone wanted this guy. But in a couple years, I just worry, Caleb, the holding on to the ball, Sean Payton's a big believer that's not a coachable attribute out of a player. You can improve. We've seen now you can improve accuracy, but the holding on to the ball is a major concern. And you saw it with Sam Darnold, like he's always had it, and then it kind of creeped back up in the biggest moment. It's almost like a golf swing. You just muscle memory in a pressure packed spot. It's just something to keep an eye on. How did he coach Jared Goff? Snap, get rid of the ball. Snap, get rid of the ball. They were not holding the ball long. That's not the way. That's not the offense he coached. So that's an interesting dynamic. The offense Caleb ran with Lincoln is a lot different than the offense I watched Ben Johnson coach with Jared Goff.
No question.